Welcome to Page 1, brought to you by the Robinson Public Library District. We have locations in Robinson, Oblong, Flat Rock, and Hudsonville, Illinois. The purpose of this program is to take a look back in time at some of the stories that made front page headlines in the various Crawford County newspapers at different points in our local history. This episode features a look back at the week of April 27th, 1952. But before we get started with that trip down memory lane, I'd like to mention that every story that we cover today, in addition to other news from the publications mentioned, can be found on our website at robinsonpubliclibrary.com. So our first two articles come from the Tuesday, April 29th edition of the Robinson Daily News. The first headline reads, "One Night Out, Drama Club Play Friday, May 2nd. The actual headline should have read, "Our Night Out," which was the actual title of the musical comedy to be presented by the Robinson High School Drama Club on the 2nd under the direction of Miss Maxine Perry. The article states that the performance will be given at 8 p.m. under the student direction of Jim Rooney with an assist from Jean Kalina. Music directors for the program were Margaret Kalina and Becky Allen, and the comedy starred Kent Shepard as the dad and Sandra Sparks as the mother, along with Larry Hill and Virginia Hutchins as the children. The quartet comprised the Burns family, and the plot of the comedy was the events that take place when the parents decide to go out for the evening. You can learn even more about the program by reading a post-program story on page 1 of the May 5th, 1952 edition of Robinson High School's News and Everything newspaper, which can also be found in our archives. And as I mentioned, the play was under the direction of Miss Maxine Perry. Now, if that name doesn't sound familiar to locals, she is perhaps better remembered for her married name of Maxine Zwerman. And it was for Maxine and her husband Carl that the Zwerman Arts Center at Lincoln Trail College was named in honor of. Mrs. Zwerman was a key supporter of not only the arts in this area for many years, but host of many different endeavors that had significance in Crawford County. And by the way, she was also a long-serving member of this library district's Board of Trustees. So our second story, as previously mentioned, also comes from the Tuesday, April 29th edition. Now this story doesn't have a local angle, but I found it to be interesting just the same. The headline reads, "Colonel Harry Truman now out of the Army." Of course, the headline subject is the same Harry Truman that happened to be President of the United States at the time. The story notes that the president was formally placed on the officer's honorary retired list on November 5th of the previous year. Now, in all, President Truman had been in the Army in either an active or reserve component since June of 1905, and for you mathematicians out there doing some counting, that's 47 years of military service. Quite a record. So Truman, of course, took over as president upon the death of Franklin Delano Roosevelt on April 12th, 1945, and he not only oversaw the conclusion of World War II, but also led the country during the 3 years of United States military involvement in the Korean War, which spanned from June 25th, 1950 to July 27th, 1953, and ended with an armistice but not a peace treaty. Our next two stories come from the Thursday, May 1st front page of the Oblong Oracle and involve two of our county service members. The first headline reads, "Corporal Lancaster at Atomic Tests." The story, Dateline Camp Desert Rock, Nevada, begins with noting that Corporal Clyde P. Lancaster from East Kentucky Street in Oblong was among 1,000 hand-picked combat soldiers participating in the Army's continuing field tests of atomic warfare. The article continues that the tactical training provided was the most extensive use of atomic weapons with combat troops in military history. The maneuver, it was added, was the fourth phase of an atomic training program known as Exercise Desert Rock. The last paragraph states that every man will have a front row seat for at least one of the spectacular atomic explosions. The story concludes by pointing out that combat troops have been assigned foxholes at the shortest distance from the atom's detonation point yet in troop maneuvers. The second Oblong Oracle story from May 1st, 1952 reads, Harlan Mitchell makes record grade in naval school. The story recounts a letter received by Mr. Mitchell's parents, Mr. and Mrs. R.H. Mitchell. The letter begins with a cordial greeting to the Mitchells, followed by notification that their son Harlan Earl had graduated from Engineman School, U.S. Naval Receiving Station, San Diego, California, as the honor man in his class of 83 men, achieving the highest score ever attained at the institution. The letter continues by proclaiming that because of his honor man status, the honor will become part of his permanent service record. The letter concludes with the writer's confidence that the new honoree's efforts will be in keeping with the highest traditions of the naval services. So our next story comes from the May 1st front page of the Palestine Register, and the headline reads, "Cancer Drive Gets Start to Raise $299.87. Now, I picked this story for two reasons. First, the specificity of the target goal of $299.87, and secondly, in the lead paragraph of the story, it notes that the fundraisers do not plan to make a house-to-house canvass unless necessary to meet their necessary quota. And finally, our last story, we return to the front page of the May 1st edition of the Robinson Argus. There was a column that apparently at that time that was published entitled "My Suggestion for a Better Robinson." Now, this space gave residents or former residents the opportunity to provide their 2 cents on how to improve things in the city. In this installment, the writer noticed that at least 2 North Howard street signs were pointing east and west, and that while perhaps a small matter and somewhat amusing to some residents in the community, could turn out to be confusing to those visiting the city. So the writer's suggestion was to have all signs checked in the spring to ensure that they were pointing in the right direction. The writer, Conrad Pinkstaff, apparently was a former citizen of Robinson who had recently relocated to Centralia. So now my question after all this was, after the signs were turned the right way, just how many ended up being turned the wrong direction again? Well, that's going to do it for this edition, and I hope that you learned some things about our Crawford County, Illinois history that you might not have known previously. As I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, if you want to read more about any of the stories or any of the other items from these editions or the nearly 500,000 pages available, go to our website at robinsonpubliclibrary.com. Once you're on our homepage, you need to go over to our genealogy tabs, and then you'll scroll about 3/4 of the way down the page where you'll see a photo with the caption Crawford County Newspaper Archives. Click on that picture to enter the archives. And if you're unfamiliar with the site's navigation, there's a detailed set of instructions directly below the newspaper archives picture. The directions can either be downloaded or printed. Well, if you like this episode or program and you want to see more, please make sure to click the like button and hit the subscribe button at the bottom of the page. And we'd like to thank you sincerely for watching, and we hope that you'll tune in for our next installment of Page 1.